Okay, let's hear what you got. No, don't like that. That's better. I like that. That's the one.
Welcome to episode 5 of Chats. Today we are talking about the Greta effect. I'm Corbin.
I'm Sarah.
And we have a very interesting topic today.
Because I came up to you a little wound up last night, didn't I?
Yes. Yeah. Well, this has been happening for a while now. Just the talk in our house about the state of climate change and people who keep on defending that it doesn't exist. We watch the news. We know what's happening most of the time about these
Try to
topics.
keep current.
Yep.
Yeah.
And as we said in the title, it's the Greta effect, and we were referring to...
Greta Thunberg.
Yes. Yeah, so do you want me to go over a bit of the history quick? Or
Yeah, why don't you give people who aren't familiar, Greta Thunberg is a young person. She's 16, I believe, but you've got more information on her.
January 3rd, 2003. So I think that's one of her greatest strengths, but one of her greatest weaknesses is, scholars, non-climate change believers' eyes, because as we're going to talk about later, people see her as, a child, a spoiled child, when in fact, she's very mature, and she's speaking up for her future and the kids, younger than her's futures.
Absolutely.
So really nothing was known about her until she was 15, so last year. In 2018, in August, she spent most of her summer outside the Swedish parliament, calling out the government for stronger action on climate control and global warming. And other students started to back her in this movement.
It was always Fridays, I believe. Like she always did the Friday walkout.
Yes. Yeah. And that was during school, I think. But after a while, they brought her to the 2018 United Nations Climate Change Conference, because the student strikes took place every week somewhere in the world. Like it was during the big movement, I believe, of that. And after that, she kind of just skyrocketed to fame, even if she maybe didn't want that. People around the world either love her or hate her. Really nothing in the middle, which is sad.
She brings out strong opinions and feelings in people, I think.
Yes. And the other thing that we were debating bringing up was they list her awards, which obviously she's not in it for the awards, but I thought it was important to bring up because it shows that she is credible. She is not just some kid yelling into the void and no one's listening to her. People...
Yeah, she's being recognized in the international community for sure. People
of power and influence are looking at her and realizing that she has something, worthwhile saying. So she has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 awards, all within the 2019 year.
And she's actually recently rejected an award on climate change. She says the last thing this movement needs is more awards and people applauding. Is more what's needed is more action. So very interesting to see that type of approach, because usually when you see someone attain that level of fame and prominence, they're okay with continuing to receive accolades.
Let alone a 16-year-old, because usually when you see child actors and stuff, kind of different scenarios. But someone who skyrockets into fame at a young age, they kind of tend to blow up, or their ego implodes on themselves.
Yeah.
And I think she's, the cause is strong, and therefore she is strong with the cause.
Well, what kind of got me wound up last night was, a couple things. And I know we've already covered social media, but because I spent a lot of time on it, and that is, to a certain degree, how I get some of my news, there were two things that popped up. The first thing was I saw a meme on Facebook from someone who I consider a friend. A little concerned about that now. And it was basically ripping into Greta, saying the whole temper tantrum thing from when she presented at the United Nations recently, and about how she's spoiled and acting out and really needs to check herself. And I'm going to break that down a little more in a minute. The next thing that finally motivated me to want to talk about it on chats is the fact that Jane Fonda, who most people know currently as one of the stars of Grace and Frankie on Netflix.
Okay.
She actually has a very long and illustrious career. She's from the Fonda family. Her father was Henry Fonda.
I know her as the lady who keeps on getting arrested for protesting.
And I was just going to say, bringing it full circle, she was a protester during Vietnam. She was actually known as Hanoi Jane. And if you want to deep dive on protests in general, you want to start looking up protests on the Vietnam War. So she knows what she's talking about when it comes to how to protest. And I think she's really looked at this situation with the awareness and the lack of gravitas that's been given to Greta, and taken another step further, and she's initiated what she calls Fire Call Fridays. So it's kind of a spin on what's being done with the youth movement.
Yeah.
And now that youth movement isn't just in Europe, it's come to North America, and it's become a global initiative, in countries around the world. With Jane Fonda, she actually was being interviewed on CNN recently, and one of the comments she made was the fact that she felt a personal responsibility. She's in her 70s, to be clear. And she said, this is not an issue of the last decade. This is not even an issue of the last 20 years. This is an issue that should have been checked 30 to 40 years ago. And something just kind of broke in my brain. I'm 48.
Yeah.
And I can remember being a kid and seeing the tire fire in Hagersville. And for those of you who live in Ontario, Hagersville, the tire fire back in the 80s was huge. It burned for days. It was a mountainous pile of tires. And it just burned and burned and burned. And we saw pictures in newspapers of this massive pile. It was basically, instead of recycling like they do today, they just would bury them in the ground. And this place in Hagersville, I can't remember how many thousands of tires they said they had. But that's just an example of something that had a profound effect on me as a child, knowing intuitively, this is wrong. There's something kind of messed up with these tires burning. And they just started on, like, it was an accidental burn. This was not how they were disposing tires. They were literally just piling them up in a big old pile of tires.
This was intentional. This is the first time I've ever heard of this, and I can't believe it, because obviously how I've grown up with you guys and just, very environmentally conscientious was, you don't burn tires, you don't burn plastics, when you're even if you're outside and having a campfire and you have like a plastic container that's broken or empty,
don't throw it in the fire.
Don't throw it in the fire, go throw it in the recycling. So to hear this, that's insane.
Yeah, and subsequent to that, I grew up on a farm. And a number of the people in the community surrounding us, that was their mode of garbage disposal. And that's not judgment. That was culturally accepted at the time. Everybody had a burn pit. Yeah. There was a corner of your property where there's either a depression or a space that was suitable to just, take a tractor and push your garbage in there. And when it got big enough, you lit it up. Which, even saying that now, I'm cringing thinking about that. But that was the custom at the time. And go back a generation. I can remember, and you remember this too, being at a farm once upon a time, and you'd go through and you'd find the area that was the dump area of the farm, and you'd find old bottles and old cans and
random stuff.
And as much as it's neat to look at now, it's also kind of horrifying, because you realize that's an extension of improper waste management, but that's all they knew at the time. So the argument today of, oh, well, if you have this kind of vehicle, if you're doing that, you're the problem, or if you have electronics, you're the problem. So it's interesting to me that Jane Fonda took this approach about how, right now the number that most experts are using is 11 years. We have just over a decade to get our acts together and make some serious changes that are going to help save this planet. Yeah. But when I saw, so then going back to the meme I saw on Facebook with Greta, when I was looking at this, I was just so frustrated, because again, you know this is written by an adult.
Yeah.
And it's being predominantly shared by other adults.
And they've taken the time to make, like, if you can't see the image, but there's like a special font, there's a border around
Oh, there's production on this.
There's a photo of her looking unpleasant. It's like tabloids where they just go out and attack people with.
This is the photo. This is the day that she was at the United Nations when she said "shame on you."
Yeah.
Like that. This is the "shame on you" speech that they're using.
But the way they're using it, what I mean is is in the
Not
text they're saying
flattering,
she's a spoiled child, and if you looked at that without context and without knowing who she was, she looks like a child having a bit of a temper tantrum.
Exactly.
But in reality, she's emotionally attached to what she believes in, what
She's
believe,
passionate.
and what is right. You know.
And again, we can talk about white privilege and white male privilege another time. But if that was a man or a young man, he would be applauded for having conviction, and he would be held up as an example to others.
Well, I think the word that goes along with that I see a lot is, it's a young girl, and I see brat.
Yeah, well,
that's not commonly associated with young males.
Yeah,
it's commonly associated with young females, which is sad. And she's in her late teens almost now. Like
mid-teens,
she's mid-teens going on late teens. If this was a girl who was 8 years old and still saying this stuff, I would still respect her as much as Greta. But it's what they say.
Oh,
it's
she's
what
got
they
points,
believe. Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
So I'm going to read this to you, and we're just going to rip this up because I can't even begin to tell you how upset I was. And I know I came to you with it right away and said, look at this shit.
This is the autopsy.
This is the dissecting.
Yeah.
This is your grade 9 frog in biology class. Okay, so the heading of this piece of crap is how about a little dose of truth to help ease that temper tantrum, which... that's not even passive aggressive. That's just aggressive, and it's condescending, and it's insulting.
And that's what they want because they want to hook people in.
That's right. Anybody who felt attacked or didn't agree with what this young person said, this information is for you. Mm-hmm. Okay. First point. To all the school kids going on strike for climate change. First point. You are the first generation who have required air conditioning in every classroom.
We were talking about this last night.
That just wound me right there.
Well, I was in school not too long ago, and let me tell you, all those things, most of the things on this list that deal with schools or students, we don't have the choice in. We're not on the school board deciding we're going to put air conditioning in here. We're not the people building the school, putting air conditioning in. On hot days, since there is air conditioning, we'll probably have it on. I don't remember clearly if there was.
Yeah, I don't know if most schools in Canada have air conditioning. Yeah. I think in urban centers they do, but not all schools. I could be wrong, but I'm not familiar with any in this area.
I remember
it's called open a window.
That's what I said. I remember opening windows more so than someone saying turn the air conditioning on.
Yeah. So the fact that this is the first generation who have required air conditioning in every classroom, well, that's BS because the kids actually have no ability to facilitate that. The next point is you want TV in every room and your classes are all computerized. Okay, so next point here is, again, the kids don't have any say on whether there's a TV in every room of the house. I would suggest that's the parents. And that's a whole nother dialogue about social standing and the whole keeping up with the Jones concept.
Yeah, I thought it was
just let me finish. Yeah. Sorry. And then to finalize that all classes are computerized. In this day and age where computers are being utilized daily, it's a disservice to young people not to have computerization in our education because they are going to be required to use it in high school, in college, in university. So again, I'm just calling bullshit on a bunch of this stuff that's really, and I'm sorry if the language is offending you, I'm going to say bullshit probably about 16 times in this podcast. It really upset me. Sorry, go ahead, Corb.
I don't have enough time and effort to bleep them all out either, so you'll have to deal with it.
Just turn it down.
Yeah.
Just turn it down.
No, I was just gonna say that when I originally heard that, you took it as TV in every room at home. I'm still thinking about school,
right?
Because there are a lot of TVs in schools, but that actually works out better because when I was in school, I was kind of in the middle of the transition period. I was in high school when they had overhead projectors.
Projectors, yeah.
But then when I was leaving, they had smart boards,
right?
Or they had TVs. But in the middle, they had overhead projectors, smart boards, and then another type of technology that was practically the same thing.
Right.
And it's like all of this waste for and it was an overhead projector.
Right.
So it's like one of the old projectors, the new overhead projector.
To clarify, you're talking about the projector that would be wheeled in on a cart, like
Yes.
my generation?
Yeah.
And then you're talking about an overhead projector that'd be mounted to the ceiling.
Yes.
Okay.
And then a TV. But now they just have TVs most of the time.
Right.
But that's because you can hook the computer up instead of having the projector.
That's right.
You can, use it as a smart board essentially, and it's lowering down on the.
It's not as expensive.
It's not
too,
as expensive,
I'm sure.
and it's lowering the amount of materials put into it. So,
right.
yeah, it's probably better that there's only TVs in every room
Yeah.
instead of all that other stuff.
The next point is you spend all day and night on electronic devices. I would hold this back in the face of the person who wrote this, because if you actually had the time to create this graphic,
Yeah.
you didn't do it in 5 minutes. I would suggest anybody who's spending frivolous time on electronics needs to revisit that. That's not an age thing. That's a cultural thing, again, that needs to be addressed.
This person probably, as soon as they post it on Facebook, they're the type of person to sit at their desk waiting for the notification saying that someone liked it.
Exactly.
So that's the type of person I see this person as.
Well, it's just an angry person.
Yeah.
So now the next point is, more than ever, you don't walk or ride bikes to school, but arrive in caravans or private cars. When I say caravans, I think of literally a caravan of camels. That's what comes to mind. But
I thought of a carriage, like a horse and carriage, like they're
Yeah.
because that's what they're making out to be, private vehicles and stuff like that.
Well, first of all, let's go back and first of all, we have school buses. Unless you're a completely urban center that does not require any school buses. School buses are mass transportation. That's public transportation. So, again, we've totally overlooked that. Are there kids that get dropped off at school? Yes, there are. Are there kids that walk to school? I know when you and your brother were little, I actually was upset at how far you had to walk, because it was literally from one end of town to the other end of town. And because we were like 1/10 of a kilometer past the board mandated requirement, you both had to, once you got out of kindergarten, you were picked up for kindergarten and your brother got to ride with you for kindergarten. And then once you're out of kindergarten, you were expected to walk from one end of town to the other to get to school. So I think when it comes to safety and things like that, I'm not going to make someone else's judgment about whether or not they drop their children off at school. I know they have walk to school days that are very much gaining in popularity, but what it comes down to is we're really picking at things if you're going to say that the kids are the ones. I mean, honestly, sometimes it was more convenient for me to drop you off than have you walk across school if you had a project or it was Halloween or whatever.
Yeah. I had a couple of things to say about this.
Sure.
First off, I see people going to school and stuff. When I went to school, tons of people walk still. Tons of people ride their bikes. And the other thing is that if you are writing this, this is probably an older person.
More mature, yeah.
No,
older, not mature. I take that back.
Older person. I don't want to keep on saying it's a he, but it could be a she.
Sure.
It could be just someone of older age. How do you know that factually unless
None
you
of this
have
is
children?
facts.
But the other thing is that why don't you ride a bike? Why don't they? We were talking about this last night. Why don't they go walk?
Yeah.
Instead of, what's their
You're
excuse?
expecting young people to adopt behaviors and practices that you yourself as an adult would never do. Because again, it's a societal thing.
Yeah.
The next point is you are the biggest consumers of manufactured goods ever and update perfectly good expensive luxury items to stay trendy. Again, could we generalize more? Who's buying these items? Because you can't tell me the 16-year-old can afford to update luxury items. Again, I would suggest this is a parental decision and parental funding, and they have to make a better decision as far as how they're spending their money for their kids and what message that's sending as far as expectation for their child's lifestyle moving forward. But that just, Anyway. Your entertainment comes from electric devices. As I hold an electric device that I'm viewing this ridiculousness
We're recording on an electric device.
Yeah, so again, I don't even understand where that's supposed to be relevant.
What was
Because there are cleaner ways to obtain electricity, so that doesn't even address.
And what was
a point.
the point again?
Your entertainment comes from electric devices. because we've moved past, dancing around fire.
Well, that's how it is. It was like that when this person was probably a kid as well.
Yes.
Like, you had TV when you were a kid, and obviously that wasn't your main source of it. But practically since the 80s, I would say, if you're a kid, most video games, TV, movies, all of that were pretty big, especially like the 90s. I'd say from the 90s, like I hold firm till now. If you were a kid at that time, you had the main source of entertainment was technology. The 80s is the midpoint, and then 70s, obviously, I'd say not so much.
Yeah.
So,
well, the good point about this is this person then provides the next couple of points, which are, finger quotes, solutions to what they believe is the issue.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, because someone has to have the answers here. So the first point is, tell your teachers to switch off the air conditioning. Actually, they say air con, because they're cool and hip like that. I'm not going to address that.
They ran out of room because they had so much angry stuff ahead of it.
Well, we're not going to address that because I think we bludgeoned that to death earlier on.
Especially if you're a kid that's in kindergarten and you walk up to your teacher all high and mighty and say, turn off the air conditioning. This angry post on Facebook told me to. The teacher's going to... even taking it seriously, I guess. If a kid walks up and tells a teacher something, especially a younger kid, younger than 16... In my experience, there's no way a teacher is gonna take that seriously. There's no way a teacher is gonna.
Well, even if they did, let's just jump out of reality here and say a child goes up to the principal and says, "Turn down the air conditioning." First of all, it's not necessarily controllable at the school level, so that becomes a board issue. Do you think imagine how that would go over? I know here in Ontario, when the Toronto school boards, when the heat gets up and the parents are absolutely livid because their kids are in schools that are far too hot, and they feel it's too uncomfortable for them to learn in that environment because it's just not acceptable. So let's just start with that. Yeah. The next point: ride a bike, ride a bus, or carpool to school. Switch off your devices and read a book. Eat less manufactured processed foods. Learn to research facts and think for yourself and not blindly accept the words and thoughts of others. Holy shit.
How many people like this post?
I cut it separately. I didn't even want to, because it's been shared and shared and shared. So, yeah. Again, physician, heal thyself. Because look at, dude, all this crap that you've put into this post is nothing more than crap. And if these children are eating processed manufactured foods, again, how dare they go out to the grocery store and purchase these things for themselves? It's ridiculous. It's absolutely insulting. And I think this is going to do nothing but breed animosity between generations, because you're going to have young people say, there's a more of a generational gap when you've got a young person feeling that they're not being heard and respected, by the previous generations. I know the New Zealand legislature, they posted a video recently where one of the members of parliament called out a baby boomer because he was heckling her. She's 25. Yeah. At 25, she's an adult. She should be respected and given the same professional decorum and consideration that any of her peers are being given. Yep. So anyway, I couldn't get my head around that when these two things popped up, and I thought this is definitely worth talking about, because for people who think that our youth of today are inappropriate in speaking out, I would suggest, in my age group, I feel a certain burden of guilt because we didn't do more. And I think as each generation backs up, they should feel more guilt. I think if you're 58, you should be feeling really bad. If you're 68, you should feel worse. And if you're 78, you should, basically, throw yourself on the ground and beg for forgiveness of the future generations, because were it not for the fact that we had nothing in place and there was no expectation at the time, we would probably not be in the situation we're in now.
No. But, and that's the one thing as well, is that the person who wrote that, if they came face to face with Greta and they talked, Greta would have the guts.
Answers, yeah.
Well, not the answer, but like the maturity and the guts to stand and talk to this guy or girl, this person. And I don't think that the person who made that would have the audacity to say any of that to her.
No, I agree with
because
you. Safety of the keyboard,
and that goes right back to the social media stuff where keyboard warriors and such. But at the end, I made this joke off off
Before we got on
microphone where I said it's for the Greta good.
It's for the Greta good, for
Get
sure.
that trending or something.
That's right.
That's
Hashtag Greta good.
It's a good line.
So we've kind of had our rant here today, and it'd be interesting to know what you think. So if you are listening to this podcast, please give us some feedback and let us know. And you know what? Again, if you disagree with us and you think that she's totally out of line, we'll respect that. Keep it polite. That's all we ask.
Yeah.
And if you want to give us feedback, you can send us an email at chatspodcast@gmail.com. That's chatspodcast@gmail.com. Or you can check out our Facebook page where I might post an edited version of this because I really have issue with the photo that they've used. But just to show the ridiculousness of the information that they've posted alongside it, you can follow along with the reading or with the podcast here. So
sure.
All right.
I think that's a wrap. So I'm Corbin.
I'm Sarah.
And be sure to join us for our next chats.